Okay, what I'm about to tell you is going to absolutely shock you. Exchanges in the UK are now banning users from buying more than 1% of their portfolio in Bitcoin. This is an absolute disgrace. What's going on here? You are not allowed to own more than 1% of your portfolio here in Bitcoin. Think about it, where have we ended up here? 2001, a user reports, I just got kicked out of Kraken because I said I might invest more than 10% in Bitcoin this year. I had to go back and say that I will not invest more than 1% in risky Bitcoins. Britain is literally trying to keep its population poor. So what's happening here is that Joe Nakamoto, who posted this, and by the way, this post is really going viral, wanted to allocate more than 10% of his portfolio to Bitcoin. He mentioned that over 10% of his portfolio is in Bitcoin, and then he tried to buy Bitcoin on Kraken, but he wasn't allowed to continue using the platform. He then had to go back and lie here. If he hadn't lied, he would have been banned here, probably for life. He's being prohibited from buying more than 1% of Bitcoin. So technically, you can still buy more than 1% of Bitcoin, but then you're stepping into illegal territory if you have to lie about it, because it seems like it's now forbidden in the UK to hold more than 1% of your portfolio in Bitcoin. On the other hand, if you have 20 or 100% of your portfolio in fiat money and you're constantly losing purchasing power, basically getting expropriated, let's say, with government approval, then that's totally fine. But if you have even 1% in Bitcoin, then that's absolutely not okay. Then you can't buy Bitcoin on these platforms anymore, at least if you're being honest. But if you have even 1% in Bitcoin, then that's absolutely not okay. Then you can't buy Bitcoin on these platforms anymore, at least if you're being honest. And now the problem is that the platforms often can't do anything about it. So this is just regulation that's being passed down from the UK to the platform operators, and they have to enforce it one way or another. And if they don't do that, then the whole platform will just get shut down. That means the platforms are also just caught in a huge vicious cycle. And the craziest part is, if someone in the UK wants to buy Bitcoin on Kraken, I'm not sure how it is with other exchanges, I'm not familiar with the UK. Anyway, if someone wants to buy Bitcoin here, they either have to lie or buy under 1% of Bitcoin. Plus, they also have to confirm that they're investing in risky Bitcoins. So you have to tick the box and say clearly, hey, I accept that I am investing in risky Bitcoins, and that is quite a shock because, as I said, I have said this many times before, Bitcoin is actually the most risk-free thing there is. We have no third-party risk, there are no central banks, there are no politicians who can interfere, there are somehow, I don't know, very, very few points of attack. The code is open source, anyone can check it, which means we have as few points of attack as possible. Sure, there's some volatility, and you could say that if you hold it short-term, there's a certain volatility risk. But long-term, Bitcoin has really become a safe haven. Even Larry Fink knows this and says, hey, Bitcoin is the flight to quality. But apparently, that hasn't hit home in the UK yet. We're also seeing other regulations and censorship, where people are just thrown in jail for retweeting some tweets or something like that. So that's risky. And we also have to consider that if this is happening in the UK and they escalate like this, it could easily spill over into the EU or other countries. These are blueprints. They're checking to see, okay, does this work? And if it goes through and people accept it, then it just becomes the norm. The user has clearly shared this, so if you think this is some kind of fairy tale, no, you can clearly see the images and the evidence. It clearly states here that trading is not allowed based on the answers they provided, so they are currently not allowed to trade on Kraken. This is due to the requirements of the British regime for financial advertising. So you see, this is basically nothing other than what Orwell predicted. At some point, you either have to go illegal or you just end up poor in fiat money. This is due to the requirements of the British regime for financial advertising. So you see, this is basically nothing other than what Orwell predicted. At some point, you either have to go illegal or you just end up poor in fiat money. So it's basically state-sanctioned that people are getting poorer, which is just unbelievable. You've already got inflation here, and if you have solutions like Bitcoin, which is limited and can't be inflated, they just say, no, you can only hold a maximum of 1% in Bitcoin. And that's exactly how, for example, if you have solutions like Bitcoin, which is limited and can't be inflated, they just say, no, you can only hold a maximum of 1% in Bitcoin. Bitcoin bans use regulations, not direct bans. Bitcoin bans are being enforced. It's not like they're just going to come out with a rule saying, hey, you all can't hold Bitcoin anymore, and anyone who does has to go to jail. Instead, they're going to create regulations. Then they say, okay, you can all have Bitcoin, it's no problem at all. But if you have more than 1% Bitcoin in your portfolio, then you can't buy it on exchanges. You'd have to, I don't know, go to Santa Claus and ask him if he can give you Bitcoin or something like that. This means that the regular RIX is being increased so massively that it is becoming, let's say, very, very difficult for the average person to buy Bitcoin. And I have to say, Joe Nakamoto, who has been affected by the hardcore Bitcoin regulations, sure, he lies and finds ways around the rules, but then there's also the average Joe who hasn't spent 1,000 hours studying Bitcoin. When they see something like this, when they realize, wow, I could be breaking the law or I have to lie just to put 2 to 3% of my portfolio into Bitcoin, they get scared. They think, crap, I have to sign something saying Bitcoin is super risky. And that just freaks them out even more. So those people end up staying away from Bitcoin, and they just keep their money in a savings account with Olaf Scholz or something, and they end up systematically getting poorer. And that's an absolute no-go. We definitely need to fight against that, but at the very least, we need to create awareness. So really, hey, share this video, like it down below, and hit that subscribe button. It's really important that we gain traction and get the message about Bitcoin out there, because it can't be that more and more regulations are coming in, telling people how much of their portfolio they can allocate to Bitcoin. And that's an absolute no-go. We definitely need to fight against that. But at the very least, we have to create awareness. So really, hey, share this video, like it down below, and hit that subscribe button. It's super important that we gain traction and get the message about Bitcoin out there, because it can't be that more and more regulations are coming in, telling people how much of their portfolio they can allocate to Bitcoin. I mean, where have we ended up, in socialism or what? In another message from the exchange, it says that we need additional information. Due to regulations in the United Kingdom, we're required to gather information annually about how you classify yourself as an investor, followed by a short quiz on your investment knowledge. So you have to take a quiz, and if you write down the right answers or give the answers that the state requires from you, then you can continue buying Bitcoin here, not agreeing on Bitcoin's risk or holding less. If you don't sign that Bitcoin is risky, or if you don't sign that you hold less than 1% Bitcoin, then you basically can't trade Bitcoin anymore. So it's kind of like in school where there's someone playing God who says, okay, hey, I've got all the wisdom. I know exactly what's right for the people. I know exactly what the truth is. You see, I've had contact with God. I've had a revelation, and God told me this and that is right, and this and that is wrong. And anyone who writes in their paper that Bitcoin is highly risky gets an A, and anyone who writes in their paper that Bitcoin is the best performing asset of the last 15 years gets a B and fails. And anyone who is on the stock exchange and says that Bitcoin is the best performing asset here in the last 15 years in the quiz is simply not allowed to trade Bitcoin. You can only trade Bitcoin if you say, hey, I'm actually buying garbage, I'm buying bullshit. I sign here that I'm buying bullshit Bitcoin, which is highly risky and speculative. And that's why I'm only going to allocate a small part of my portfolio to it. So this is absolute brainwashing, where they're systematically telling you what you can and can't do. And then it is officially said, yes, it is not a ban at all, because you can buy Bitcoin, you can put 1% into Bitcoin, so it is not a ban. We have an open market here, a free market. Anyone can buy Bitcoin, anyone can buy Bitcoin. But what is being kept secret is that it is actually more like a ban, because I think most people want to allocate more than 1% to Bitcoin, at least the people who are involved. Even BlackRock is recommending a 2% portfolio allocation, and now in the UK, you can only buy 1% of Bitcoin. And then, of course, a massive security warning popped up, along with a restricted investment declaration. So, heads up, it's risky to put all your money into a single company or type of investment. Spreading your money across different investments makes you less dependent on the success of any single investment. So now they're telling you that you have to diversify. You can't put all your eggs in one basket. It's basically the same as saying, hey, okay, we have horses, and now we have, for example, cars, and the car is just way better than the horse. But we're going to mandate that you stick with horses because, let's say, the risk is too high. If everyone switches to cars, the risk is just too great. The car is just way better than the horse, but we're now mandating that you stick with horses because, let's say, the risk is too high. If everyone switches to cars, the risk is just too great. Now you have to diversify. If everyone switches to cars, the risk is just too high. Now you have to diversify. Now, if you want to get around at home, you need a horse and a car. That doesn't make any sense. Everyone knows that the automobile is superior to the horse, and that is why people no longer buy horses. Bitcoin is the superior asset. Bitcoin is like a car to a horse. People realize Bitcoin is better than stocks, real estate, etc. Bitcoin is like the automobile compared to the horse. And now there are people here who realize, hey, Bitcoin has much better properties than other assets, stocks, real estate, and so on. And now the government comes in and says, hey, I know there's the automobile and everyone's using it. But for your own safety, you also need to have a horse in your garage for diversification, because that's just how we've decided it should be. We're connected to God. We know what's right and wrong. We've got all the wisdom. And you need to keep horses in your garage too. But that's just absolute economic nonsense, because anyone who understands Bitcoin also gets that Bitcoin is probably superior to other technologies. I mean, if someone voluntarily decides to diversify, then that's not a problem at all. But that is absolute economic bullshit. because anyone who understands Bitcoin also understands that Bitcoin is probably superior to other technologies. I mean, if someone voluntarily decides to diversify, then that's not a problem at all. I mean, there's nothing wrong with a diversified portfolio. I mean, there's still a, let's say, small chance that, for example, that there's something wrong with a Bitcoin code, or that something might go wrong, or that you might overlook something or something like that. Therefore, yes, you can diversify. I don't want to speak against diversification, so don't get me wrong. It's a concept that has probably worked really well over the last 100 or 200 years, and a lot of people have gotten burned by going all in on some assets. But what I want to say here is that Bitcoin also has the qualities to be, let's say, the superior asset vehicle for storing your purchasing power. And there are definitely people who recognize this for themselves, who, for example, what I want to say is that Bitcoin now has the qualities to be, let's say, the superior asset vehicle for storing your purchasing power. And there are certainly people who recognize this for themselves. For example, say, hey, I just want to go all in Bitcoin, but that's not possible because you get these messages, these warnings, and you're basically forbidden from going all in Bitcoin, and you just have to diversify. And again, like I said, if someone chooses to diversify, that's fine, but when you're forced to diversify, I just find that really, really strange. It says that you shouldn't invest more than 10% of your net worth in risky investments. Otherwise, you could face significant losses. Apparently with Bitcoin, it's not 10%, but just 1%. Then it goes even further here. For the purposes of this explanation, high-risk investments include peer-to-peer loans, investment-based crowdfunding, shares in a long-term asset fund, crypto assets such as Bitcoin, and so on. Then there's this whole list where they basically define what's risky and what's not. I mean, yeah, investor protection, to a certain extent, I can somewhat understand it. There have definitely been a lot of scams like FTX and whatever else, but you can't go overboard with it. So to some extent, I get it. For example, warnings are common at exchanges. Acknowledge Bitcoin's volatility. Stocks fluctuate too. Be aware. And even with stocks, you can say, hey, there's a certain level of fluctuation, and just be aware that it has some ups and downs. Have a long investment horizon, hold on through it, and make sure to bring in information about the asset. For example, information about the asset. This is E.G. It's really, really well done at 21 Bitcoin. Here, what I always recommend is that there's actually an info page right in the app where you can learn about Bitcoin. It explains different aspects of Bitcoin, like why it's scarce, why it's valuable, why it might make sense to buy Bitcoin or not, and what the risks and opportunities are. I'll put a link below to 21 Bitcoin where you can easily buy Bitcoin, and it explains really, really well what Bitcoin is. There's a little overview there. And you can also save up to 20% on fees when buying Bitcoin with the code BitcoinHotel. But if it's just being dictated in a George Orwell style way, like you can have this much Bitcoin, this much gold, this much real estate, and the rest has to be in fiat, then that's a total red flag for me. It shows that the traditional money system is falling apart because they have to force people to stay in euros or dollars. And to wrap up this video, on a more positive note, let me show you my hyper bullish Giga waterfall jump. Dawn. We're here in El Salvador for the hyper bullish Bitcoin to the moon waterfall jump. Are you ready? Let's fucking go.